All right, guys, today we are going to finish up the cognition unit with intelligence and intelligence testing notes. When we talk about intelligence, first off, what we need to do is we need to be able to define it. And it's very blurred lines kind of way to think about it because intelligence means something different to multiple different people. That's why I have all these different quotes about intelligence here. But in psychology, we define intelligence as our ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and to use knowledge to adapt to a new situation. Now, it is hotly debated. It's a very controversial topic in psychology. It always will be. It's like nature versus nurture. They can't really ever come to a solid conclusion. And for intelligence, the controversial topic is intelligence just one thing, or are there multiple different intelligences? And today we're going to look at people who argue for multiple different intelligences. The first person we are going to talk about today is Howard Gardner. He is a professor at Harvard, and he was kind of the first guy to come up with a theory of multiple intelligences. He said it's ridiculous that everyone falls under the same umbrella of one intelligent. We're all such unique people. It's too ridiculous to label everyone as having one specific kind of intelligence. Instead, there are 8 separate kinds of intelligences. There's a 9th intelligence being considered, but right now the 8 are kind of the ones that we look at. And Gardner's views are also controversial because everything is in psychology. Because some don't consider the 8 as actual intelligences. They just look at them as skills. So let me show you the 8 so you get a better understanding. You take a look at the graph on the left, we've got visual, spatial, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, logical, kinesthetic, naturalistic, and linguistic. And Gardner argued that it's unfair because most tests and most school educational tests, think SAT, ACTs, only test linguistic and logical thinking. So they only test, English or word smart people versus math smart or number smart people. When in reality, Gardner's saying there's 6 other kinds of intelligences, okay? So think about musicians, think about incredible athletes, kinesthetic intelligence. Think about people who compose entire symphonies. That could be considered musical intelligence. So that's kind of those. Visual, spatial, graphic designers, architects, that's a kind of intelligence, Gardner says. Inter and intrapersonal. Interpersonal is your ability to basically relate to other people. These are great leaders, social workers, teachers, hopefully, are very good interpersonal intelligence, versus intrapersonal, that's metacognition. That's people who are really good at understanding their inner feelings. The 8th one is naturalistic. That could be a biologist, a veterinarian would have a high naturalistic intelligence. And again, some people look at these as skills versus actual intelligence. You can decide for yourself. We're going to do a test in class. You guys can see where you tend to lean towards. The 9th intelligence that is not included but is being considered is existential intelligence. And the next guy up is Robert Sternberg. Robert Sternberg took Gardner's ideas and said, okay, 8 is way too many types of intelligences. I'm going to narrow all of those down to 3 types of intelligences: analytic, creative, and practical. He's a professor at Yale. That's not important. Yale and Harvard, it's very cool that we have 2 living professors of psychology whose works we get to study in class. So if you look at the picture on the right, it'll give you kind of a breakdown of each of the 3 intelligences that he claims. Analytic intelligence is mental steps or components used to solve a problem. That's your math people. That's your very left-brained, calculated thinkers, creative intelligence, use of experiences in ways that foster insight. So that's people taking things and looking at them in different ways. That's your more creative, artistic people. And then practical intelligence, the ability to read and adapt to the context of everyday life. So if you ever hear someone say like you have good common sense or you have good street smarts, that's kind of practical intelligence. Here's another example. You can pause and take a look at this. And now we go into emotional intelligence, and this is my favorite thing and favorite part of intelligence to talk about. I'm going to give you guys a really cool article from Harvard Business Review on in class, and you can read a little more about how emotional intelligence, and it's fairly new in psychology, but it's basically your ability to interact and understand others. And if you check out this graph, it says 90% of top performers have high EQ or high emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is 58% responsible for your job performance, $29,000, all right? People with high emotional intelligence will make $29,000 more than their low emotional intelligence counterparts. So studies are showing time and time again that emotional intelligence is extremely important in the workplace, all right? So emotional intelligence, like I said, is your ability to perceive, express, understand, and regulate your emotions. Basically, think about social cues. Think about conversing with others, understanding others, all right? People high in emotional intelligence, like I said, are way more in touch with their feelings and the feelings of others, okay? Dan Goleman is spearheading this research, and like I have already said, emotional intelligence is actually a better predictor of success in life than your traditional IQ. So even if your IQ isn't too high, if your emotional intelligence is high, you'll actually get further in life. Here's a graph of kind of descriptions of people with low intelligence or emotional intelligence versus people with high emotional intelligence. They're just more likely to be able to interact with people better, get up higher in companies, be better leaders. That's emotional intelligence. Then we move on to Charles Spearman. So he's still piggybacking on the ideas of multiple intelligences, but he kind of narrows it down. He says that there is this general intelligence factor, and he shortens it down to G, just the letter G. So it's almost like a math problem. So he said general intelligence factor underlies other more specific aspects of intelligence. So he basically took all of these different ideas of intelligence and combined them all into one factor, kind of like an IQ number. That's your general intelligence factor, or G. He uses factor analysis to identify closely resembling variables, and he found a core factor. That core factor is G. So he looked at all of these different factors in intelligence and was able to narrow them down to G. So if you look at this, it has like verbal, mechanical, spatial, numerical, their specific abilities, and he put them all into G, basically your general ability. So he was trying to simplify multiple intelligence down to general intelligence factor. And general intelligence factor can be more specifically defined that it's specific mental abilities and is therefore measured by every task on an intelligence test. So it's taking all of these different multiple intelligence tests and summing them up into one factor, or G. Now, the next so basically all these psychologists are piggybacking off each other's ideas. And so Horn and Cattell, mainly spearheaded by Cattell, but Horn also helped out with the research, but Cattell is the big name with these two kinds of intelligence. They looked at the G factor and they said, okay, because of course they need to separate it even more because it's psychology. We are going to separate the G factor into two different categories, crystallized and fluid intelligence. So crystallized experience or crystallized intelligence is learned knowledge and skills like vocab, okay? So you want to think about that like a crystal. A crystal gets bigger as you go through time, just like vocabulary, okay? When you are little, you have a certain amount of vocabulary, and hopefully if you're receiving the correct education, it's going to grow and grow and grow with age. Versus fluid intelligence, which is cognitive abilities requiring speed or rapid learning. So that's kind of the quick, rapid processing. It usually peaks in early adulthood and tends to diminish with age, usually because you have so many other crystallized memories that it's kind of hard for that fluid, quick, rapid processing to happen because there's already so much crystallized in your head. So now we want to talk about actual test construction. So we've talked about different kinds of intelligences, but how do you test that? And I'm sure you've heard these two words before. Before you can talk about what kind of tests to use, and we'll get into those, you need to talk about how to actually make one. And when you're making a test, you want to look at, the first thing you want to look at are the norms, and your norms want to be standardized. So you want to have kind of that baseline to look off of. So the average score for an SAT is 500 with a standard deviation of 100 versus the average score for IQ tests is a 100 with a standard deviation of 15. So a standardized norm is your baseline. You're able to look at that number and be like, okay, this is where I fall on the scale compared to the rest of my peers taking this. And just like we were just speaking of with Spearman, factor analysis also comes into play here. Factor analysis it's a statistical procedure that identifies common factors among groups of items, just like Spearman did with his G factor. And it determines which variables have a high degree of correlation. So that's how you get a norm and you standardize it. You analyze your factors, figure out which ones have a high degree of correlation, and put those together to make your baseline. Now, when you make a test, you want them to be reliable and valid. Again, I'm sure you've heard this in science and math. Reliability and validity are the two things you look for when making a test and hopefully when taking a test too. So first, when you look at reliability is the extent to which a test yields consistent results. So no matter when you take the test, no matter what day of the week, no matter what age, no matter what emotion you're experiencing, you're going to get fairly consistent results. This is not like the SAT. The whole idea of the SAT is every time you take it, you're supposed to get better. There's three types of reliability. First, test, retest reliability. Taking the same test and receiving similar score, kind of like I just said. Split half reliability, which is your score on the first half of the test's questions is very similar to the score on the second half. So if you think about multiple choice and FRQ of the AP Psych exam, hopefully, if it's a reliable test and it's testing reliably, your score on the multiple choice is going to be fairly similar to your score on the FRQ. Third is score reliability, and this is no matter who scores your test, you should get a similar score. So the score of the test should be similar no matter which scorer is scoring your test. So think about when the readers sit down to read your FRQs for AP Psych. They know that rubric like the back of their hand. They should all be giving you similar scores, okay? I don't know about for other AP classes and AP tests, but AP Psych is pretty straightforward. So it should be high score reliability. Now you go to validity, and validity is, questioned and kind of looked down upon a little bit, especially in testing. Like I have this picture right here. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And clearly 5 very different things. It's like the SAT. Is the SAT really a valid way to test whether someone's going to do good in their future or do well in college? We'll talk about that this week. So test validity is basically making sure a test is measuring what it's supposed to be measuring. So is the test predicting what it's supposed to? Does an achievement test accurately measure accomplishments? Does an aptitude test accurately measure the person's future performance? It's important that the point or the purpose of the test is known. Now, there's a couple different types of validity. First, you've got content related. Is the content, hopefully it is, testing and measuring what it's supposed to be testing. But the one we really want to look at is this one in the bottom right, predictive validity. Does the test predict later performance on a related criterion? So the SAT is supposed to test how well you'll do in college. Does it really do that? You can argue that for yourself. We're going to talk about that later in class. And this is the end of this first video. We will pick up with the rest of it in class. Thank you, guys.